So we're now recording. Welcome, everyone, to the Open Humans Community Call on May 5th. We didn't put a lot of notice or announcement out there, so I think that it might not be a super huge crowd, but that said, with a lot of lockdowns, there's a lot of people who are at their computers and interested in chatting, so that's great. We don't have any particular topics today beyond sort of things related to open humans and also to the quantified flu and other COVID-19 projects, but really don't feel limited to that. We can talk about just about anything that's sort of related to the stuff we do in open humans. So to start, we're going to have a go around, introduce ourselves and let people know if there's anything in particular you'd like to talk about. So hi, I'm Mad. I am Executive Director of Open Humans, and I would like to pass the ball to Dave.
I have to unmute myself. So I'm Dave Blackwell. I'm a member of George Church's Personal Genome Project. I'm interested in atrial fibrillation because I have atrial fibrillation. I take Eliquis, which is an anticoagulant. I'm wondering if this anticoagulant might be useful against the coronavirus. Who knows? Because this coronavirus is unusual because it actually causes microclots in your epithelial blood system. I take B12 and D3 and zinc glucoconate, and I'm hoping those will prevent me from catching any of this. Pass the ball on to, let's see, Katarzyna.
I think that's Kate.
Yeah. Kate. I go by Kate. Maybe I should change my name. My name is Kate. I am leading Quality of Life Technologies Lab. I'm a computer scientist, interested in quality, quantified self, and practitioner, and I'm really hoping to contribute more to open human community via research and other ways. And I pass the ball to Abhik, if I spell it properly.
Yes, a big like a big ballpoint pen. No, it is a weird one. But yes, so Bic, also a computer scientist, also into quantified self and the sort, first time joining a chat. So would love to hear more about what you guys are interested in your intros, just like at a high level since very new, but also into data collection projects, wearables researcher at Arizona State University by day. And so really interested in those wearable data streams and making those useful for applications and like helping support you mental health wise and otherwise.
Would you like to pass the ball?
Oh, you're right. Let's go with Sterling.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sterling. My first name is the letter R. And just FYI, I know it looks like I'm not self-isolating, but we have I live on a horse ranch and our office building is literally on the horse ranch. So I am isolating. I have to preface that on Zoom calls because people are like, are you going to the office? And they get really mad. But I'm a data scientist and investor. Got started, the family business is basically data and work on numerous different companies, but got really interested with autism and disability tracking, and then which also went into health metrics and health informatics. And I founded a nonprofit for quantified self-research, and we partnered with the UN Ambassador for Disabilities, and we're hoping to release a COVID app in about 4 or 5 weeks. And so just really like open humans and like all of you guys, and interested in working with quantified flu and My Data Global and everybody. And I'll pass the ball to Bastian.
Easy for me now. Hi, I'm Bastian. I'm a research fellow in the Center for Research and Interdisciplinarity in Paris, and also the director of research for Open Humans. And yeah, I've been doing quantified self things, I think, for now 8-9 years. I think that's when I started like doing my 23andMe test, getting the first Fitbit, and since then have been collecting like too much data about myself and like just doing data visualizations and learning from my data. And I think that's it for me. And maybe related to this, like if no one else wants to go first, I want to hear about Kate's need for pointers for smart toothbrushes.
Imagine the story where I'm researching quality of life and then a professor in dental health. There was a name for this. And he contacts me and he says, we need to do research on quality of life and dental health. And so far, everything is self-assessed, based on self-assessments, very infrequent, plus somehow, depending on how frequent you want it, but some kind of, let's say your yearly checkup if you manage, right? And that's it. And that's it. And that's it. So now what else, right? So he's like, is there any smart toothbrush? And I started to look for Philips and everything, but I want to hear if anybody has any experience. Or yes.
I use the Oral-B Genius brush, and it's okay. Like it has its own app, and you know, they're starting to come out with little ones like for kids that have timers, but this one actually shows a diagram of your teeth and then tells you how long you're brushing on what tooth. So that's pretty interesting. But as far as integrations with Apple Health and you know, obviously,
API?
yeah, on HealthKit, it only integrates with time, how much time you're brushing.
No, actually, he actually really wanted the movements and how detailed you do.
Yeah.
So do you think the, besides Apple Health, can I go directly, like we do with Fitbits or others, can I go directly and ask for access to API? Have you tried this?
Or even just a file export. I mean.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Depends what variables are available, right? It's like, what do they expose?
And do you find those schemas limiting often when, hey, maybe they want like individual teeth, but Apple's ecosystem only supports, how much time generally? Or do they usually have some flexibility in like the file that you upload and say, upload like a generic file and it could have time, or it could have like individual teeth?
That's what I mean. API may expose more than Apple Health integrates. And I'm okay with accessing directly the API, or even contacting the company and saying, we are doing for research. Can we have a specific access of some kind? Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. I'll let you know. It's a very interesting project.
I see something that says you can even export the data as a PDF. I'm sorry.
Do they have a proper API? Then I would be interested in upgrading my toothbrush.
And getting a PDF, right?
Well, I hope we can hear updates. Because it'd be interesting to hear, like, because I remember when I was looking into thermometers, just trying to figure out like what smart thermometer to buy, what data exportability it had, and what sort of decisions to make. Because you won't get this with a toothbrush, but with some other devices like scales or a thermometer, these apps have like different members of the family, and then like the data for those different family members and how's that managed and exporting it. Luckily, a toothbrush is hopefully not a multi-person instrument.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends. Like the electric ones where you switch the heads, they're usually designed for multi-user.
Wow, Sterling, is the app like implying a multi-user toothbrush?
No, I'm actually in the app now because you guys were asking, so I was looking at it. And all it does is sync with Apple Health with the toothbrushing category, and I can't seem to export any data from it. I mean, I haven't tried before. Yeah, it doesn't let me export anything. But okay. Yeah, I would hope that it's not a multi-user thing, but maybe in dire circumstances.
Oh my God, this is going to be fun. I can already see it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes just like a file export is sort of a minimum criteria. APIs would be great, right? Like some sort of
Yeah, because it's not something we want to immediately act upon, right? So it's just as long as the data is somehow reliable. Yes. Saying this, who of you has changed their Fitbit to Fitbit Charge 4, and now I don't know, I cannot make my steps anymore, and not steps. The worst are the active minutes. So either it's, I don't know, it's just seem to be I'm doing the same things. I know I'm sedentary more, but at the beginning of this situation, I have set up some rules for myself through the day and walks and everything, and there were many more active minutes. At the end of the day, now I'm hardly managing since I changed into Fitbit Charge 4. Anybody? I had Charge 2 before for comparison.
So you think that changing the Fitbit has changed sort of sensitivity? They have a different step sensing algorithm?
First, not steps. Steps are fine. Heart rate. I mean, I know that there are papers which are showing that Fitbit was least accurate the more movement there is. So maybe that worked for my advantage for Charge 2, where it was counting all these different peaks of heartbeats and counting this as so-called active minutes, right? When you move at least a few minutes, when the heart rate is up for at least, I think, bouts of 10 minutes, then it starts counting this active minutes. And now I would need to run. I walk fast, so that was a happy coincidence that I walk fast, so I achieve all this active minutes per day. Now it's like impossible, almost like I run. No, I don't run. I want to walk. I walk really fast, but I don't get this. So I don't know. It may also be something which you will see in the daytime whenever people start donating Charge 4. And that tells me also that we need to be careful, all of us, whenever we are doing any integration of wearables, to have not just the Fitbit, but also the version. There must be some API for that.
So no, unfortunately, as far as I know, you can't get from Fitbit which device is being used or which device deposited the data. I think you can just get all the data for a given day or time range, but it will not tell you which device was used.
Okay, so then I switch it to the positive side. In quantified flu, we're looking into stationary at night, most likely patterns, where actually the papers are showing and research of our colleagues show that the data is, I mean, the devices are accurate. The most accurate are the least movement theirs. Yes. So.
Yeah, I think the only people who are doing this really well is Apple Health, because they, I think, for each value in Apple Health, they tell you where it's coming from, even from the device. And
yeah. But I'm thinking about your integration of your quantified flu, where people donate this data, right? And at least,
And the data they're donating is the data we can get from Fitbit APIs, and it sounds like that has this limitation.
Yeah. Do you know if there's normally a lot of inconsistency between heart rate, whether it's from a Fitbit, Huawei Watch, Apple Watch, XYZ, any kind of regular kind of differences in the data?
There are papers comparing these different wearables, and I'm referring to the one which I remember, and we reference in our papers when we look into the fact when we want to prove that Fitbit is quite accurate when stationary, and when we look at the nighttime heart rate, and the more movement, the least accurate, and there are papers comparing it to gold standards.
Yeah, I guess that's the good news in terms of like quantified flu and the illness detection, because people are focusing on that stationary data.
Yes. Go to sleep.
Yeah, and I guess I should have lots of data for comparing at least the Oura Ring to, I guess, both Fitbit and the Apple Watch, because I stopped using a Fitbit, I don't know, mid of last year, but used the Fitbit before. Now I'm using the Apple Watch, and I've continued using the same Oura Ring, so I can make some comparisons in my own data. I think this would be fun to do.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of the terrible correlation I saw between the sleep in the Oura Ring and the sleep in the Fitbit, which turned out to be an artifact of how the data is stored, because the Oura Ring attaches the sleep data to the day that you like before going to sleep, while the Fitbit puts it to the day where you are like wake up. So it's just off by one, and if you try to do a correlation, you get like a flat line, which is no correlation at all.
Oh my God.
It's just that the date is like off by one.
I remember looking at Bastian's notebook and I'm like, I know you're really smart and you probably don't have this problem, but what if it's off by a day? And he's
Wow. Congrats for hacking.
it's such a standard programming issue, right? On and off by one error. I was curious about Sterling mentioning the apps, like if we're going around and hearing like what the app is that you're releasing and what it's doing, if you wanted to share a bit.
Sure. So we had been planning on releasing this MVP for a while under a benefit corporation that basically allowed comprehensive tracking. And by that, I mean, we were going by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there's a lot of debate about that in academia in general, but saying, okay, here's how you can track your physiological data with either structured journaling or sensors. And, you know, just like all of you, I try all of the different smartwatches, the Oura Ring and the Polaris and, you know, the Samsung and see what we can do. But a lot of that really formalized when I was taking my son with special needs to all these doctors and seeing that they had to really see like therapists and doctors and all sorts of people, that they needed a comprehensive picture of his data in order to really help him. It wasn't just physiological data. So my thought was, what if there was a comprehensive quantified self? And so where it also helped you track your financial health, but that's highly, you have to be careful that you don't start building in biases and algorithms, and it's not based on quantity of assets, you know. So we basically, the app that we're releasing in a couple of weeks will have Bluetooth contact tracing. Obviously, there's a lot out there. It's going to have an API that people can, and everything is optional. People can share their data if they want, but it's also, they can just keep it local on the phone if they want. We're integrating, there's a company that are some friends of mine called What Three Words that came out with a new mapping system for the Earth. That's really cool. And they basically map the entire Earth into 10 feet squared, 3 meters squared. And we're going to not only do Bluetooth contact tracing, but also GPS historical tracing. And then that will also allow for surface tracing as well, because you're mapping the What Three Word square. And then we also are, we're bringing in a couple of things. There's supplemental questionnaires. Like there's a couple of apps like howwefeel.org and the CDC app and a couple of other things. But they've actually come out with supplemental questionnaires for people of different age groups. And where the organizations that I'm working with are Cities for All, Cities the number for all, and World Enabled. And I'm working with this professor out of Berkeley, he's the ambassador to the UN. His name is Victor Pineda. And part of the problem with people with pre-existing conditions or persons with disabilities is they have to have the appropriate medical data in relation to COVID. There's a really sad story about a child in China who had cerebral palsy, and his family got taken because they had to get put in quarantine. They got taken to the hospital, and the child ended up dying by himself in the apartment even though the dad was telling the authorities, you need to go get him, you need to go get him. And so you know, also the idea with autism is that some people are nonverbal. There's a person that I'm working with who's nonverbal, so we're integrating sign language videos as well, because most people don't realize that 50% of deaf people have a 4th grade reading level. So even they can't read text like normal apps. So we're going to have video translations of every screen, and then we're going to try to make it as universal as we can for tracking your health and basically the social distancing. And then we also have mental health tracking that we're bringing out as well. Are you stressed? Are you doing very poorly? Here's the national hotlines according to which country you're in. Most people don't realize that there's actually local departments per disability. So where I live, like there's a local speech and hearing disability department that you contact if you need help. And then phase 2 or version 2, we're going to start building in economic recovery for individuals. So do you have a job? We got a couple people that we want to integrate. And we're also using Neo4j and graph databases so that we can eventually start running some appropriate machine learning models over it. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
It sounds like a lot.
Wow. Do you have a whole team behind?
Yeah, we have. I have my own software development team. So we have about. My business partner is in Cork, Ireland, and his background is in health informatics, and he's built large systems for hospitals and all sorts of stuff. And then we have about 38 programmers in India, and then I have some programmers and researchers here. And so we build apps and stuff all the time. So it's only taking us about 6 weeks from concept to release.
Bravo! Yeah,
but a lot of it is me gathering people that are much smarter than myself and learning from their experience and recommendations, and also different cultures. And it actually right now with the developers in India, it really helps because how they're going through quarantine is much different than how we are, and different governmental regulations. And so yeah, hopefully eventually we'll be able to drop in 23andMe data too. The first version, the MVP, is going to allow people to record their cough, and then we can send it out to, because now they're thinking that they might even have a way to, they think, we'll see if they really do, but be able to diagnose from your cough, audio file of your cough, but at least we can start aggregating that.
And Sterling, you mentioned the users could donate their data for training these models, and you mentioned having the backend set up so that you could apply machine learning, and was wondering how you're currently thinking about that. I'm not sure. Alexa's being dramatic. How you're currently thinking about that kind of consent policy, as well as when you're applying machine learning, potentially be transparency on that front, and sort of how to further enable the people who donated their data to know about how it's being used, and just communications that way. Or is it just a blanket hey, we can use your data for anything, which might also be tougher? Yeah.
No, I think for me, privacy and security is one of the #1 issues. The United States was trying to actually pass a law during the whole COVID crisis that got rid of encryption. So they could basically read all of your emails, text messages, everything. And that's another one of the huge problems with all of these COVID apps, is they're just mass gathering people's data, and there's no security or privacy behind it. So I think there needs to be a consent policy for each transaction, and also categories of transactions, categories of your data. Like for instance, some organizations only need a subset. Don't hate me, but I do know the people at Hyperledger, and I know the head guy there. So we're talking about using Hyperledger Indy for just the identification PII data, and then putting everything into a highly secure Neo4j database, and then basically doing a MySQL database for just aggregating all of the national hotlines and geographic specific guidelines from people. But I think you need to have warnings and pop-ups and consent with all sharing. And that's why the person has the option to store all of their data locally on their phone, or they have the option to submit to us if they want, but they always get, we never profit. Originally I was releasing this under the benefit corporation, but now I'm releasing it under the nonprofit for free because I don't want people to think that I am disaster profiteering.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, so a lot of these big companies, when their sort of data science teams tackle customer data sets, or even the currency Dash, the way that they operate is that there are like proposals that are made to all of the master nodes. And then based on the consent, you sort of buy into proposals as an individual, as opposed to just like general, like, here's all the data. So it's like consenting to this algorithm versus like, hey, would you like to consent to your cough data being used to train an algorithm on identifying coughs? And it's like, oh yeah, that's okay. And that's different from like, would you like your cough data to be used for some other purpose that they might not consent to? Is that a model that kind of fits into what you're already thinking?
Yeah, that's basically what we're kind of hoping to build in, because I think someone I know got kind of, I don't want to speak ill of any organization, but someone I know got asked if they would build this app for this massive hospital organization, and basically they wanted to use everyone's data in a different way outside of COVID, you know. And one of the reasons I really like working with the disability community is because if you build for persons with disabilities, you actually build for all non-disabled people at the same time. And they're already used to having their medical data used against them in a prejudiced way. So if you kind of ask them, okay, how can we avoid some of that prejudice and misuse of data, then I've learned things that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
That's a good call.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting.
Tough problems.
Yeah. It is tough problems, but it's exciting, you know, and I think there's going to be, I think there's numerous ways people can help each other during the COVID crisis, and it's really serious. And one of the things that frustrates me is, especially that I learned through my son, is when people are being graded and they don't even know it. I think that's really unfair. And yeah, when they're being judged, you know, like customer rating indexes, where one person who doesn't spend a lot of money will wait on hold for support for 20 minutes versus another person will wait on hold for support for 5 minutes if they spend a lot of money and never return things. Or, you know, that's like time bias, or
time
you know,
bias. I mean, general ableism is a big one. Just like, not really helping take care of the differently abled. Did you also look into like almost zero knowledge proof structures of data collection and data sharing to potentially mitigate some of those privacy issues, saying like, hey, we set up our machine learning in a federated way so that you don't actually have to surrender your data. So federated machine learning, zero knowledge proofs, those kinds of things.
We've looked at it. I'd be happy to talk to you about it more and learn some more, because I think the problem is coming up with something so rapidly is a dual-edged sword. You know, I don't want to accidentally become like I don't think Facebook had bad intentions when they first started. I think they just moved so fast that they couldn't control the beast. And now, you know, that's a big concern. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about it and work with it on it. But each step of the way is going to be, I've been thinking about this, as we definitely pivoted, but I've been thinking about this for years, and working on R&D and stuff, and privacy and security is like my number one thing.
No, it sounds super cool.
Yeah.
It seems very challenging to get case-by-case consent and then do aggregate learning when you need a sufficient N. Like for something that needs small N, that usually works well, but it's I think worth recognizing that fundamental tension with trying to reach large N and the need for someone's attention to look at something and approve it. One of the things I like to think about is, and this is one of the tensions behind broad consent. I mean, we look at this with companies overreaching with consent stuff, but when the common rule was updated in human subjects research regulation, broad consent was introduced as a concept because there was a belief that there was good that could be had if we had the ability to ask people to broadly consent to things. And then when you start thinking about broad consent, you start thinking about what is the governance of the trusted entity. Like if you're saying, okay, I broadly consent to you using data in this way, like instead of unpacking what those allowed uses are, because that's limiting, because AI has these fundamentally unpredictable data uses to it. Thinking instead about like this entity is structured this way, it's governed in this way, it's elected or appointed and regulated in these ways, and that's how that's going to govern how the data is used rather than some set of allowances. So I don't know if you've been thinking about that in that terms, Sterling, but that's another way to think about how you can get to large ends is broad consent.
Very good point. Yeah, and it's, I agree. I totally agree with you, and that's a very good point. I think the broad consent versus targeted consent, and going back to if we eventually expand and do all of the different categories in Maslow, like how are you going to have categorical consent where you're sharing financial data on this end, but obviously not health metrics on this end, and I mean, I don't have to tell you guys, I think one of the greatest travesties is that Oracle has 8,000 data points on every human being in the United States, and it's used to sell pizzas and products. Like, we didn't consent to that, but it's there. It's not, that benefit is not going directly to the person. And that's kind of my philosophy, because I've seen how it works. I actually found, my sister found her own thyroid cancer and then brought it to the doctor. I found my own celiacs and genetic diabetes through my DNA and different DNA tests. And so I've seen it help my son. And so numerous different things about data can benefit a person's life and help a person's life. But right now that value is not going to the individual.
I wanted to pick up from the hierarchy of needs, because just before this call, Matt and I had a meeting and we were wondering of why are people even still interested in the times of the pandemic and being in lockdown, losing their jobs, interested in doing self-research in the first place, and people having bigger things to worry about. And I think I would be interested to hear what maybe some of you think about it, because I was we see people that are still interested in this, and I guess many of the people here clearly have maybe think it's still important to do self-research and self-tracking, and I would be interested to hear why, maybe maybe to get an idea of why do you keep doing this if there's more important things or more immediate needs right now for many people.
I think the main reason is that we should try to focus on health problem prevention, and I think that's very important. Also, Sterling, how do you examine what tools did you use to examine your DNA results? I used Livewello, NutraHacker, Promethease, and there's a Linvar report in the Personal Genome Project, and I have a number of other reports at different places, which I'm having difficulty examining. So I'm just wondering how you examine your DNA results.
Yeah, well, it depends on the DNA test, right? Like 23andMe, Ancestry, My Habit was with food. I actually love helix.com, but I hate it at the same time because I like the model where you can add on products to your, but obviously it's a closed platform structure, and I had to pay $500 to buy the raw DNA file, which is abhorrent. But yeah, I used a bunch of different products that looked at it as well. But I think what was interesting was just the cross comparing helped me figure out the celiacs and bring it, because the doctor said if I hadn't figured it out, this was about a year ago, and I've dropped about 80 pounds since then. The doctor said that if I hadn't figured it out, I probably would have been dead in 2 years. And Bastian, to answer your question about the in quarantine, I feel like having my office next to my house and having a special needs child, and my wife was chronically ill for quite a few years. I was basically already in self-isolation. And so I found the two things that were super important was scheduling and having appropriate zones to work, to sleep, to eat. This is where I, play with my kids. And so I think self-tracking is even more important during quarantine because it's how you can lead a functional, productive life. I'll pass it to someone else.
Yeah, on that front, with the self-tracking and general reflection, looking at when the pandemic started, I was very much in kind of fight or flight mode. Like, everyone didn't know when the peak would come, how overwhelmed various systems would be. And we were very much in, okay, how do we prepare the hospitals? How do we do these functional things? But after those first few weeks, really settling into, yeah, my life hasn't been too different from before quarantine when it comes to these are the kinds of reflective questions that'll be the foundation of kind of future human development for a very long time and really improve the quality of life for all people, and seeing that as more important now than ever, especially now that so many more people are now aware of like how dangerous the world is, and saying, hey, we should have a better idea of like what it means to be a person, what like basic science stuff, and excited about it. So that's why I'm more into it. You're on mute, Kate.
Yeah, you can see I'm thinking, what shall I say? I mean, that should be the best case of self-care, because we have choice. Oh, okay. No, I should say differently, because I don't have a family and I'm living with a partner, and we can manage our lives the way we may want. And besides all the regular teaching and following the students' obligations, then I could even wake up whenever I want if I don't have an appointment, and work in the middle of the night and everything. So that's on one side, it should have been the best ever time for taking care, and I could see it's not, because actually the basic motivation is missing, and I'm keeping my students in a sense alive, motivated and progressing. They do have deadlines for papers, and they have PhDs to write, and master thesis or whatever. And then yesterday, instead of talking about the paper, we again talked about, I'm not motivated, I cannot manage anymore. And one of my students saying, I cannot manage anymore in my little room, I'm getting crazy, right? So what do we do? And I feel it's which just really self-care from the perspective of getting through is very important. So I'm taking care of my students from this perspective. But the self-tracking comes as also there will be outlier, right? So I was looking, one of the aspects is resting heart rate, and it doesn't go down. I'm taking care, and I'm trying to walk, and maybe I was not walking enough and not doing enough exercise. Now I see based on my new Fitbit, but generally it's just staying up, and it's not anymore about lack of alcohol or parties or whatever, which was the confounding factors influencing resting heart rate. So the self-tracking, I don't want to stop it, but I know that there will be some weird data set coming in. And for those of us who are like most likely on this call, we can manage our days with respect to priorities which are taking the family or other priorities. Then the self-tracking, I think it will be good to reflect on this data later. So now I just managed to bloody charge the Apple Watch, which drives me crazy comparing to other, and also Oura Ring. It's not, sometimes I'm sleeping with the dead ring, like losing data because I'm forgetting to charge it. But never mind, the fact is it's minuscule from respect to what many other people are going through. It's just, I'm really hoping to look at the data later and to see something different. how was that? Yeah.
I think there's a theme I heard here that feels important to me. I think from Sterling and others of the needing to take control of whatever you can in your life. Right now, there's very much a loss of control, and like on one face of it, that's like, well, now I don't have the capacity to do things because I can't do the things I wanted to do. But maybe on the other side of it is addressing that very human need to feel like you do have some ability to control something in your life. So it's good for me to hear this. I'm probably one of those that's struggling more with like the loss of control with 3 kids that are at home, and we're trying to watch both of them and both work. I mean, all 3 of them, yes. So you can see it's already scattered. But I'm just one data point, and there's a lot of people in other situations. So it's great to hear these reflections. Oh, I should say hi to Carolina.
Yeah,
hello. She's
maybe Carolina will tell us.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing? I guess you just said, right? Yeah, like, yeah, I think it's so different because I was born and raised in the border of Brazil and Uruguay, and in Brazil right now we have a crazy president, just as like crazy as yours, and you're all frozen. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And then. Yeah, and then like it's been tough, and like my family is not behaving, and like the amount of information, the amount of like formal education information from the government and awareness about the disease is really low there. So I feel that like even if I got sick here and they said it was like mild COVID, like I can't complain with anything, you know, like I think I'm like privileged and protected and feeling great, while like, you know, like their lives are at risk. So it's it puts things on perspective. So like it doesn't annoy me as much that I'm in a 400 feet square apartment and like this kind of things. Yeah, I think that's the summary of like taking care, like, you know, it is a good like opportunity like to cook healthy and like take a lot of care of my body, and I'm doing it, and it's exciting to do that. But like it's impossible to forget what's happening out there. Someone said at the beginning of this that it's like it's not a question of being productive working from home, is a question of being productive in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that really nails the whole situation.
Yeah, it's definitely trying to do work well. It's not like working from home. It's like sheltering in place while trying to get work done.
Yeah, and kind of like thinking about yesterday, like one composer that I really like died, and you know, and that is like, I think we'll be like going into this thing of like loss, you know, just like facing loss for like a lot of time, not only loss of like people we love, but also like loss of connection and like so many things that will come with this. And then it's impossible to ignore. I'm working so much because I'm just like putting my head like, I don't have kids, so I have a easy life. And it's like, but I kind of like, I'm working a lot. So just, I think it's a way of like, and like taking a lot of care of my nutrition, just like as a way of like keeping my mind busy, because as Matt said, like there is a line where you have to say like what I have control of and what I don't have control of. And my parents, I had to give up a little bit because I was like for 2 months like talking so much with them, and now like they don't want to hear anymore. and they're just not behaving anymore. So it's really tense and nerve-wracking.
Yeah, that's really stressful when you have I know this situation, when you have parents that are far away and may not be as interested in taking it seriously, and they're older, and this
yeah, and not healthy at all. So it's kind of like you put all those things together, and like plus a president that goes like every weekend the guy goes like hanging out in different places in the country, like hanging out, calling like the crowd and kind of like, you know, and like wiping his nose with his hand and like shaking hands of people. It's like it's just horrendous. And yeah, so you know, like is I don't know, it's but bad things are like, yeah, but we have no control of, and like information that is like only so much you can get your parents to absorb and change on their lives. They're like old, and they're not as open like to change the way they live their lives and that stuff.
I think my parents only started taking it seriously when they saw other people around them taking it seriously. And so you just can't get through to them unless they see everyone else doing it.
Yeah. And I think that is a click when someone dies, someone that you can name and you know, like that is a click, you know, like I think that, but sometimes it's like too late, right? So
for me, the first person that I knew that like publicly got it was Vince Cerf when he was diagnosed with like COVID-19. That was like the first time someone that I like had seen before, or at least felt that I knew was close. But
yeah, no, it changes something inside.
And Matt and Bastian, I know you guys asked the question, but
did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean on the same lines of like how you guys are. I think Matt actually did answer it, but Bastian, how you're handling quantified self in these times, and sort of like what's it doing for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm also in like a very lucky situation, not having any kids, living in Paris. Like the lockdown here is it's pretty strict compared to other places of like the bureaucracy they make you go through to go even shopping. You need to fill out paperwork before leaving the house every time.
It's very French.
It's so French. By now, at least they have like a PDF generator, but in the first few weeks, you actually need to either print it or like have a handwritten document every time you left the house. But so yeah, I mean, I'm in a lucky position. I'm used to working remotely because ever since I started Open Humans, I've been working remotely because I've never been in the same place as Matt. So it's like, it's not really new for me. It's like hanging around on Slack all day. It's like, yeah, that's like my life already in any case. But so yeah, I'm doing pretty well with all of it. And it's like the quantified self. I do notice I sleep much better. Since the whole lockdown started, I get more sleep. And I sleep better. And it's like I'm more rested, but also what has definitely suffered is like all the physical activity, because if you have to fill out a piece of paper every time to go out and do anything, it's like, maybe I just stay in today and I really just go out if I have to. So this lockdown part works quite well.
This is the first I've heard about sleeping better though. Is it because you have less physical activity?
Yeah, also maybe it's just like, now it's like, well, it's like I work all day, somehow I'm tired in the evening. It's like I go to bed earlier, I sleep longer because I don't have to go to the office. I work from like literally 2 meters of where I sleep. Like you win a lot of sleep time by just not having to commute all of a sudden. So it definitely changed like in this direction. I see how I'm like gaining weight of not adapting my nutritional intake to the new reality of like having maybe a third of the exercise I used to get.
I think this unpacks another reason self-research might be nice in this time is there's so much idiosyncrasy. And a lot of when we do research is we come up with broad answers that's like to broad things, but the situation has just changed. And so some of those broad answers might not be so true anymore. And small scale research, small groups or N of one or N of many ones is great at getting at these idiosyncrasies that might be new idiosyncrasies we didn't realize, like sleeping more even if your activity is down.
Yeah, and I think that like I've been thinking about that is like if you're in all the time, right? Like what, like something probably changes. So there are many things that change, like the amount of light you get, the amount of movement, but like even if you try to do inside, is it the same thing? Is it the sun, like the sun that you get through the window is not the same one you get like outside? So it's like, what are like, you know, there's something out there maybe like that the body, like something that like maybe you can't measure right now, but something that changes and it gives like this sense of normality. And I've observed this, that like the body may learn or forget some things. So I'm biking a lot. I have a bike here, a recumbent bike, but then I saw like I will like I was not joking. I think I will like forget how to walk because like muscles like to carry memory, right? So like I think I think there may be metrics that we ignore right now, and like things that are occurring in our body just for not being as much outside.
I'm wondering if people, among the people I know, about half the people think people are not following the isolation enough, and about half the people think the isolation and rules are too hard. And there's actually been protests about this type of stuff here in Massachusetts and in Boston. And I'm wondering how your friends feel about this too, because you know there's some really obscure rules. You know, the idea of filling out forms to go outside would not go here in the U.S. Let me tell you, there'd be a lot more protests. So I'm here in Massachusetts. The lockdown's fairly hard, I think, but compared to like New Hampshire, Maine, there's been protests up in Maine. People I know are protesting up there. They think that you should just wear a mask everywhere and not shake hands and stuff like that. You should be able to do most things, maybe not go to bars and restaurants, but even bars and restaurants, if there's enough social distancing, if you want to go, you can. Obviously, old people like me wouldn't go to bars and restaurants because we don't want to be exposed. But young people, they're fairly healthy and they can fight this off fairly easily. They want to go to bars and restaurants. So what's people's opinions about this?
I think there's not enough science out, especially with sort of the long-term effects of the disease not being known, and especially like, as we all know, the limited data capacity of the medical system and the research system, and saying like, hey, if they looked at like our data and said, oh, it seems as though there's some weird items with your heart, X, Y, Z, that are actually cropping up, I think on these timeframes, it's probably not a good play, but Arizona is opening up, I think, like next week with nail salons and hair. So, yeah, it's scary.
I'm also in the States, Dave, and I live in Oklahoma, hence living on a horse ranch. And one small college town here made national news because they threatened the servers and waitresses, and they basically rescinded the mask order within hours of that happening. And we were like, what are people thinking? And I think the biggest problem with this is that they're making, at least in the States, and I think this is happening in other countries as well, from what I understand, is it's becoming a political issue. Instead of this is a scientific issue, this is the science behind it. Like, it's going too far on both sides in certain areas. Like in Michigan, they made gardening non-essential. So you would get fined if you were out in your backyard growing food for the crisis. But at the same time, phase one of reopening in the United States is movie theaters. What the heck? Like, of course, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So, and yeah, so it's a political issue. It's not a scientific issue. And I think that's where there are a lot of problems.
Well, if you're wearing a mask in a movie theater and everybody else is wearing a mask in the movie theater, maybe that's okay. If you open up a movie theater, just make sure everybody's wearing a mask and don't touch anybody. And
how about a drive-in? We should bring back the drive-in movie theaters.
I've heard that too.
Oh, it's happening in like Ireland. I think they are doing the driving concerts. There's a single musician at the stage and like lots of people in their cars.
I think.
Yeah. Oh, go for it.
Oh yeah, I was going to give my opinions. I think that one of the things I think about, like, I feel very powerless in terms of like there's policies, and in California there's a policy against childcare workers being hireable unless the person they're giving care for is like doing essential work. And then what is essential work, that sort of thing, and do you fall under that and you're allowed to hire someone or not? And that's state by state. But one of the things I've been reflecting on is the extent to which these policies, you know, as you noted, Abek, it's not like we don't have enough knowledge, so people are kind of like making best guesses. And there's a phenomenon of institutional isomorphism. I don't know if you've heard that term in sociology, where it's that phenomenon where you see another organized entity has created a set of policies and you're like, well, I'm not sure what to do, so I'm going to copy what they did. And that, like, the states and the countries, this is happening on a political scale, right? Where each state and each country is not entirely sure what to do. And so when not sure, they look at what another country has done. And I guess it makes sense that that all turns into a political thing, because they're going to want to copy something that looks politically like them. And so eventually these policies formed through copying each other's and making best guesses become political issues, because you're copying from this guy and not that guy. And there's all sorts of outliers you can point to, right? Like Sweden didn't close stuff down, and like how did that work out? Well, apparently it didn't work out disastrously, therefore it's okay. Or like maybe the disaster is going to happen and we're just waiting. I don't know. I don't have any answers, but I did want to make the observation of institutional isomorphism is probably a very real phenomenon right now, just copying someone else's policy sets.
Well, I've been following the death rates. I've been following the death rates here in Massachusetts, and most of the deaths are 80-year-olds or above. The next group is 70-year-olds and above, and the third group is 60-year-olds and above. Under 60-year-olds, there's relatively few deaths. So it's primarily a disease of anybody who has diabetes, inflammation, overweight, all kinds of things like that. They call it an epithelial disease where you are actually causing micro blood clots in your lungs and other places, and that's preventing you from breathing properly. And that seems to be the characteristic of the disease. It's not affecting people who are asthmatic as much as they thought it would. So the disease is not progressing as they first thought it would be progressing. And it's primarily for people who have other problems. So young people, I think, are going to get sick of these restrictions very quickly. And I know, and even among the older people I know, they don't think the lockdown should be as hard as it should be. And it's primarily medical professionals who seem to be most concerned about this. And my wife is a nurse, and she's pretty concerned, but even she thinks lockdown is a little too tight here in Massachusetts.
Dave, I think one of the things that I tell my friends is, I'm like, well, what would you be doing anyways? Like, half the people I know complaining would be sitting at home watching Netflix anyways. But to your point about young people, I mean, they're starting to find out that there's so many long-term health ramifications of this. Young people are stroking out and having lots of medical problems. They don't know yet how it's affecting people's lungs. There was a famous fitness person in the United States where his lungs went to basically like he'd been smoking for 30 years all of a sudden. He was in his 30s. And so I think what's going to happen, like Beck said earlier, there's not enough data. And so a year from now, we're going to see what the long-term health effects are of all of this. And I think younger people will wish that they took it more seriously.
And there's some societal ramifications too on top of that. I think that's a good point. I think that when it comes to it's just kind of problematic when you let people based on sort of whether it's their age, whether it's their demographics, partake differently in the economy, and saying like, oh, if you have diabetes, you are no longer able to be as economically productive or economically able, and just because of the basically lack of social support systems in America, that as we're seeing with the essential workers and like what is essential work, like Matt is saying, it becomes very problematic based on like how closely tied our individual successes with our economic success, and broadly barring certain demographics of people on participating in the economy based on like health factors is probably a tough needle to thread.
Yeah,
I totally agree with you.
Related to this, I mean, like in Germany, they are now discussing whether they should make a passport that shows that you get the antibody test, and if you are tested positive, then you can go out again. And you can immediately think about what will happen. Like people will throw parties to finally get COVID-19, to finally be allowed to go outside again. It's like, what are people thinking? It's like, it's nearly as stupid as the regulations in France, which now say that you are allowed, once you write your piece of paper, you can do 1 hour of sports a day in a 1 kilometer radius around your house. And in the beginning, you could do this whenever you wanted at any time of the day. And then they said, oh, too many people go out. You are now allowed to do it before 10 a.m. and after 7 p.m. So now all of these people doing sports and going running meet each other at the same time at the same places. So I think overall people are good at following the rules here, but the rules are just being adapted to make them less sensical than they were before. People are starting to wonder, it's like, well, you're just adapting the rules to make them even less secure. Is this a great idea?
Yeah. Everybody's sending around that Men in Black quote where persons are smart, people are dumb, panicky animals. The groups of people are having problems. Well, and I have a friend who's on like a permanent ventilator, and he cannot go to the hospital because they will take away his ventilator and intubate him and then use his ventilator for COVID. So
like he knows that's what they'll do.
Yeah, like they've passed that rule. He knows that's what'll happen. It's not like him guessing, like
rule.
The triage rule.
Yeah. The policy level stuff, the triage stuff. I mean, it's rough. I think I have sympathy for policymakers because I'm not convinced that any one of us would do a better job in that position of trying to adapt and constantly update the rules once someone points out that it had an unintended consequence, which is always going to happen.
And I think that's to your point earlier, Matt, when we're sort of talking about Sterling's project and saying, when you give your data to another party, what is the governance of that party? Now that they have that fiduciary responsibility, and saying, yeah, existing governments not set up to be very transparent or flexible of the sort. And it'd be an interesting thought experiment, or Sterling actually has a platform by which he can implement some of these ideas on how to have a better governance structure where you can actually meet the needs of your constituents better.
So I think we're at past time by 10 minutes. So with that nice, like tying things together thought, maybe I'll encourage what we can all say until next week. Do you want to have something final to closing thought, Dave?
Yeah, I'd just like to take a quick survey. How many people have had the 23andMe or something similar done? Okay, and have you submitted your results to any of these analysis companies like Livewello, NutraHacker, or Prometheus? Nobody. Okay, that's interesting.
Well, I might have done one or two, but I did it like DIY because I know genetics, so I just dove in myself.
Now, how did you actually find genetic variances of interest?
So when you got a ClinVar report, that might have been related to something I did. What I do is I go through and sort them according to rarity because I find the most interesting ones to be the ones that are the most rare, and match them against ClinVar because it's public to get information and dig into literature.
Now, how did you find out which of your variances were most rare?
So I was using Exact, but now there's Nomad. Daniel MacArthur has lab has compiled a whole bunch of data. It's like super awesome for variant rarity.
So using Nomad, you can actually submit your genetic results. Is that right?
You can use it to get frequency data, but to get frequency data for all of your variants, I think I was using what was the thing that Andrew Sue's lab did? It was like a variant. My variant. Yeah, myvariant.info. So I recommend myvariant.info because it lets you. It's like database as a service, so you don't have to load all these different like up-to-date Nomad databases, and you can use it to query data in a structured way. So that's what I did, is I pushed the data against Nomad. I'm able to do all these things because I'm a programmer and I know how to use these tools. But myvariant.info was how I got the Nomad data. Sorry, that was very detailed, but
good. Dave, I use geneticgenie.org once in a while for 23andMe files.
My overall recommendation though is variant frequency and look for the rare stuff. That's the interesting stuff.
Okay. Good to know.
I have a few of them. I had like 6 digits, so it's pretty cool.
I did find out I was a carrier for a known genetic disease in my family. So I have 2 uncles with intellectual disability due to microcephaly, and yeah, I don't know what it means to carry that, but I've got one of those broken copies.
I think the multi-gene variances are the most interesting thing because it's a combinatoric problem, and you may have some serious homozygous variant, but it doesn't happen in you. And that's because you don't have the other variants that might be necessary to have that problem.
I think the rare heterozygous stuff is interesting. I think combining variants across different genes is very, the analogy I draw for people is that it's like you have a circuit board and you don't know if these are in series or in parallel. That is a very good analogy for metabolic pathways. And so just because this gene and that gene are all associated with some outcome, how they interact like within a metabolic pathway or other types of interactive pathways in biophysical models is complicated. They might be in series or in parallel or something more complicated. So like the naive sort of multiplying those risk factors together, there's just no reason to think that that's appropriate or correct.
Well, I've been analyzing my methylation pathway and my transsulfuration pathway because those are pathways where I have 2 variances or 3 variances that are of note, especially the CTH gene variant that I have. But that's a relatively well-known metabolic pathway. There are a lot of metabolic pathways that are still being researched, and there's a long ways to go.
So shall we wrap things up?
Yeah.
Close with a bit of nerd talk. Sorry.
Thank you.
I look forward to
Bye.
next week.
Yeah,
Thanks everyone for
see you
being
next
here.
week.
Yes.
See you guys next week.
Speak soon.
Bye.